My paper is on Aristotle and the modern nation state. I wrote this for my ancient philosophy class last semester. Right? Aristotle's doctrine of the mean is model in relation to the contemporary structure of the state. In modern-day global affairs, the ideology of the nation-state consists of a social, cultural, and political entity. It is used to refer to political, economic, social, and cultural actors in international organizations. The major function of the nation-state are to guarantee its members ownership of private property, maintain the frame of the economy, regulate conflict between other nations, ensure liberty and equality, and create an identity of a common culture in which its people can relate to. These are key ideas in which world politics are centered around. If this model is true, one may realize that the concept of the nation-state can be better understood with the application of Aristotle's virtue ethics found in the Nicomachean Ethics. If it be countries such as France or India, it is apparent that each state differs in personality, behaviorism, deliberative methods, and the aim into which their state is to achieve. Thus, states display virtue of character in how they decide and interact with each other. Rightly, nations are constantly faced with making tough decisions which require them choosing the right action. Here, the doctrine of the mean stands clear more than ever. When a state is to make an important decision in regard to what is beneficial for itself, it seeks to choose the middle ground of two extremes. Therefore, it is essential to grasp how the concept of virtual character exhibited in an individual can be applied to a much grander scale. Nation-states embody virtues, more namely virtues of character in its own right. Seen through the Aristotelian lens, one can better understand the collective nature of nation-states, having a virtual character by instituting the doctrine of the mean as its judge in the contemporary international system. Distinctively, one way a nation radiates virtue is by abiding to the destiny of the human function. Members of a nation-state each identify themselves of being part of a holistic unity of individuals sharing common fundamental interests of liberty and equality. A nation is charged with the responsibility of securing the opportunities so its members can fulfill their function. It is important to point out that, quote, the human good turns out to be the soul's activity that expresses virtue, end quote. This means that first, the soul expresses reason. Second, our function is to perform our function well and in excellence. Third, the human function is to live a complete life and live finely. So, when we live our lives in completion, only then will the result of this will lead to virtue. Therefore, for Aristotle, our function is a unique characteristic of what a person is able to do. Animals can feel pleasure, but cannot engage in rational activity. For these reasons, it is essential that a nation abides a human function, because it further expands the idea of how a nation-state can become virtuous. I assert the idea that just as the choice made by the individual human has as its goal rational activity, so too the whole community has the same goal. Aristotle believed in this impression, for he says, quote, for while it is satisfactory to acquire and preserve the good, even for an individual, it is finer and more divine to acquire and preserve it for a people and for cities, end quote. To know if a nation-state exhibits virtue, one must first realize that we can understand societal choices as working by the same logic as individual choices. In today's culture, as the members are identified to a nation-state, there are corporate bodies of laws that must be followed. These laws ensure our rights and security. As citizens, in order to avoid penalty, people seek to be law-abiding citizens under the nature of the law. When citizens obey the ordinances established by that particular state, most people would see them as virtuous for their actions. In obedience and demonstrative in promoting the good and abstaining from the bad. If this is true, Aristotle's definition of human function is upheld, since our human function is to live our life finely and in fullness. Aristotle suggested, quote, one swallow does not make a spring, nor does one day, nor similarly does one day or short time make us blessed and happy, end quote. Obeying some laws and not others eliminates virtue. Displaying spontaneous acts of goodness does not qualify for virtue either. Virtue is unchanging. The virtuous person always seeks to promote the good in all cases. Hence, in modern politics, this concept could also be applied to the nation-state as a whole. The government must establish the laws in such a way that it habituates its citizens in excellence and allows them the right to promote the good, to live their lives well. If the governing body of the state fails to recognize this ultimate aim of ensuring natural freedoms and the happiness of its citizens, then the state epitomizes no virtue in relation to human function. If the premise that the state is to ratify appropriate laws to garner virtue for itself and toward the human function is true, the discussion shifts to the topic of examining the interpersonal relationship between state and citizen. The focus on habituation is a prime tenet here. Aristotle asserts, quote, a state of character arises from the repetition of similar activities, end quote. These activities imply character. If one wants to be honest, one performs honest deeds. It must be acquired. So how is this done? The role of law in a nation is to ensure that these habituated practices endure throughout one's life. Aristotle upholds the specialty of law as an instrument for the preservation of virtue. Since one commonly feeds on his passion and diverts from his upbringing, law should urge people towards virtue so that they can focus their sights on fine things. Aristotle strongly argues that, quote, law, however, has the power that compels, and law is reason that proceeds from a sort of intelligence and understanding, end quote. Since law is the instrument to govern, the role of law is best used if, quote, if the community attends to upbringing and attends correctly. If, however, the community neglects, it seems fitting for each individual to promote the virtue of his children and his friends, to be able to do it or at least decide to do it, end quote. Taking the Aristotelian outlook, the administration of a nation is not only charged with the task of ensuring equality and liberty for its people, but its legislators are to enact excellent laws which serve to properly develop the character of its citizens by habituating them in right actions. From this claim, it is necessary for high-ranking officials of a nation to have a virtual character, for they must have knowledge of the universals, understand the first principles, and relate these definite principles to particular circumstances through intelligence. If the highest leader of a state illuminates the epistemology of wisdom and intelligence in his daily affairs, he will come to understand and finally deliberate with reason of what is in the particular best interest of his state and act upon his proper reason in order to produce general happiness for his country. In the end, the good leader has the virtue of character, and since Aristotle claims that political affairs involve intelligence of particulars, he will be able to reason with the goal, deliberate on the right action, and execute the action in accord with the mean between two extremes. Since Aristotle argues that an individual can display virtue of character through habituation of performing fine actions, my goal is to stress that this central concept can be evaluated on a grander scale. Like individuals, nation-states can acquire virtue of character by habituating its citizens in fine things and making the right decisions in their global affairs in accord with reason and the doctrine of the mean. Though we have investigated the modes in which a nation can stand with the virtue of the mean, it is equally significant to highlight those actions which nations are to avoid. Some actions rest in excess or deficiency in its originality and are incapable of reaching a mean. Aristotle strongly emphasizes that base actions have no meaning in general. If these are true for the individual, the same could be said of the actions of the state. It is to my belief that Aristotle would agree with me when I say that the true virtuous nation would fulfill its national function by doing actions that best promote its citizens and shows apt cordial relations to its neighboring countries. Aristotle says that there are some actions which an individual cannot do. Actions such as killing are considered inherently base. Frankly, these actions do not even have the potentiality of displaying a mean. In the Ethics, Aristotle asserts that living finely in completeness and virtue involves undertaking actions that lay in the mean between excess and deficiency. For instance, imagine a soldier who shows acts of bravery. When in battle, he is valiant in the face of danger and stands firm in distress in the right ways, for the right ends, and at the right times in accord with reason. Thus, bravery is a virtue because it lies between the vices of rashness and cowardice. Those actions, like bravery, are capable of virtue because it's already in the mean. This virtue is able to actualize in a person's character. When you take acts of theft, they do not have the potentiality of being virtue since it is innate immoral. Broadly, if an individual commits base actions, to Aristotle, he is not considered virtuous according to the definition of the virtue of character. In practical politics, the same could be said of the actions of nation states on a macro level. For a state, there are acts in which it must abstain from because it is indubitably hindered its virtue of character. So I argue that actions considered base for the individual on a micro scale directly correlates to the character of a nation state when it comes specifically to the circumstances surrounding the motivations of war. Hence, Aristotle's argument of base actions is purely as relevant to particular individuals as they are on a macro level to nation states in the international construct. In noticing the connection between individuals and a nation state in terms of virtue of character is made vibrant when discussing what motivates countries to go to war. There are countless reasons of why countries decide to go to war, such as over religion, riches, land, etc. But most importantly, all of these can be boiled down to two main reasons: a passage to a better way of life and to protect the current state of life in a nation. Wars can be deemed justified or unjustified by the mode in which they were entered. Uniquely, in this particular case study, I would like to compare the motivations for the American Revolution and Nazi Germany's treatment of the Jews, with the Dr. Mead being the judge. Given the American Revolution, would it be considered a just war, giving motivations to wage battle with Britain? I believe Aristotle would think that the colonies demonstrated key virtues such as justice, bravery, and temperance, and expressed their actions in the right way and for the right end. The doctrine of the mean would deem the actions of America fine because it fought not out of baseness, but addressed a wrong suffered through injustice. All their actions revolved around the intermediate of justice. Moreover, Aristotle argues, quote, justice produces and maintains happiness, and for the same reason, justice is the only virtue that seems to be to another person's good. End quote. Thus, in order to secure the opportunity that every member has the capability to fulfill their human function, the state must perform their actions in the mean. America displayed admirable virtue of character as a populace, upholding their God-given right to independence. As it was seen how America revolved their actions around the mean and radiated a virtuous character, the sheer reverse is seen in Nazi Germany war on the Jews. Adolf Hitler and followers of Nazism committed unspeakable and brutal acts towards them. Jews were tortured, burned alive, and sent off to concentration camps, only to suffer horrific cruelty. Undoubtedly, Hitler's actions were not justified by any means, but they rested on purely base actions. Slaughtering another human does not even have potential of being a mean because it is inherently base in its nature. Due to the impulse of Nazism, most citizens of Germany were being habituated in immorality. German propaganda claimed that the war against the Jews was patriotic. Thus, it could even be argued that patriotism is a virtue. However, I argue the opposite. I believe patriotism is not a virtue, but merely a loyalty to a particular nation. Reason being, it is only a temporary sentiment that can fall out of existence just as quickly as they are developed. Namely, virtues exceed national boundaries and forever remain in an unchanging state. One could make the additional argument that patriotism is something done out of good intention. This is misleading because if a nation has a corrupted virtue of character such as Nazi Germany, one could be brainwashed into performing vicious actions in which the doer might see as fine. In a sense, this is the great worry of virtue ethics. This brings me back to my former point, that excellent laws are necessary to preserve habituated virtue. If the nation fails in this aspect, not only does the nation display no virtue of character, but contributes to the added difficulty in forming a just society under the doctrine of the mean. In closing, virtue is an important facet for a nation-state to radiate on the international level. By now, it should be seen how Aristotle's virtue of character for the individual is mutually compatible to the grander scale of world politics. From thoroughly investigating the carefully formed definition of virtue of character to applying the doctrine of the mean to real-life case studies, sheds light on the prominence that the mean should be sought after in all cases. Only then will virtue flourish in abundance in the ideal Aristotelian nation-state.